Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And welcome back to Brighter Morning with Bhoe. My name is Bhoe. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Megu just now. We're going to move on shortly to Dr. Sheila Rampersad to talk about a different subject, but no less important, which is the role and functioning of the media in Trinidad and Tobago. As you know, this week what we are doing is exploring the issues around independence, how well we have done or how much more we have to do because of missed opportunities, the current climate and what it portends, and moving out of COVID into the future, how do we navigate for a brighter place, so to speak, for our country and people in the world. Now, I dealt with some of the local issues earlier as I led up to the conversation with Dr. Megu. And before I go to Dr. Rampersad, I want to deal with an issue that is international, global in scope and impact. And that is what is happening in Afghanistan. I think all of us should be interested in this, what is happening there, because of the many things that are involved and the ultimate implications for the world. Do not think for a minute that what is happening in Afghanistan is disconnected from us here in Trinidad and Tobago, nor is it disconnected from the region or the hemisphere. And this is something that I want to explore. You know, you have a situation in Afghanistan now in which the deadline date of August 31st has become the most important thing. And the United States, President Biden, after different and contrary reviews, urging him to extend the date to be able to take care of all the soldiers, all the Americans present in Afghanistan, and all of those who attach themselves to the American effort in Afghanistan. After some deliberation, has decided that August 31st will be the deadline. And he has decided that because he has indicated that he does not want to put American soldiers in harm's way with the Taliban. And therefore that deadline is now going to be met. The consequence of that is that Afghanistan, which during the conflict up to the time that the elected government of Afghanistan fell, was a country that was producing refugees. It was a country producing refugees just like Myanmar was, just like South Sudan was, just like Syria was. So Taliban was the fourth country in that series. And of course, right here in our hemisphere, Venezuela was the other country producing refugees. Even prior to the takeover by the Taliban in Afghanistan, Afghanistan was one of these 5 countries which I just mentioned: Venezuela, Syria, South Sudan, Myanmar, that was producing, generating 68% of the world's displaced people. So you can imagine what the situation is now with the American pullout and the extent to which we are going to have an additional number of displaced people in the world, in an area of the world that is growing, an area of concern in the world that is growing, that is to say the displacement of people and displaced peoples. And it looks like, given the conflicts that exist in the world, that is not going to go away anytime soon. And this issue of displacement is going to grow and grow and grow. And as I said, it is not divorced from our hemisphere. It is right here in Venezuela next to us. We just saw the photos, the videos of the floods in Venezuela and the devastating effects of it on the landscape and on people. So the refugee and displacement crisis is very much a part of our consciousness and part of our current historical experience or current contemporary experience of living. And it is not something that is taking place in some far-off remote place called Afghanistan. It's something that is very much with us. And I want to say that this issue of human displacement is going to be a very, very important moral testing ground of world sensibility and of the ethos of leadership and of our capacity for humanity in the world. That is what it is evolving into. And why do I say that? We, I think, have come to appreciate, although we don't have the information to clearly understand it yet, that, and we certainly cannot understand how a democracy and a democratic system that has been an example for the world for a significant period of time, if not before, certainly from the end of World War II. That's to say the United States, we have had trouble understanding how the election process in the United States can throw up a leader like Donald Trump, first of all as the leader of the Republican Party and their nominee for president, and secondly, how he could win an election in the United States, and thirdly, how, given the constitutional framework of governance for the United States, he could have operated in the way that he did. And that has become an issue, and this whole matter of Afghanistan was really something that Trump set into motion by negotiating directly with the Taliban, leaving the Afghani government completely out of the negotiation process and therefore weakening them in the process. But having said that, I want to say that that current which led to the emergence of Trump and his domination of the world stage for almost 4 years is not isolated in the personality and personage of Trump. We had a situation recently in the Parliament of the United Kingdom in which the Prime Minister of Britain wiped out $5 billion of aid, pounds of aid to developing countries in the world. And he came to the Parliament and he said that it is not that it was not a concerning issue, the challenge of developing countries and the need for Britain to support them. But what was more important was for Britain to look at the world practically and to make practical decisions. So these practical decisions that have to do with the self-sustainability of industrialized countries is now becoming a feature of consideration in the world system. And while President Biden was seen to have a very different disposition to Trump and to have an alternative view of the world of cooperation, collaboration, etc., what we have seen in the person of President Biden is that he might have been trapped or bound by the negotiated arrangements made by Trump. That is true. But in the matter of addressing the evacuation of American interests from Afghanistan by a set deadline of August 31st, which he extended because Trump had negotiated May and he took it to August. Once that deadline was set, his focus was more on the deadline and secondly, on getting American interests out and the consideration for those Afghanis who had helped the U.S. enterprise in Afghanistan to be considered. He was less concerned about that. Maybe he thought that, look, let's get our people out and then we could negotiate about that later. I don't know. We will see as the time unfolds. But the point I am getting to is the fact that this hardline position is now emerging in industrialized countries of self-interested sustainability. And I think all of us who live in the rest of the world, in countries like Trinidad and Tobago, need to be aware and alert of what is happening there in the geopolitics. There is more to this. This is just a small, small slice of the cake that is being baked. But I simply alert you to it as an important question for consideration, and I want to put it in your consciousness. But we have a wonderful guest this morning. I have not seen her in person for a long time, but it would be good to talk with her today and to see her on the video. And we want to welcome now Dr. Sheila Rampersad, the president of the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning. How are you, Dr. Rampersad?
I'm good, Dr. Tiwari. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And let me just say more accurately, you can describe me happily as the outgoing president of the Media Association. Matt is due for elections on October 2nd. And it's an opportunity, I guess, I will take here to give our association a little plug and invite all our members to renew their fees, renew their membership, etc., ahead of the elections on October 2nd.
All right, great. Well, this would give you a chance, if you are the outgoing president of MAT, to reflect a little bit on the state of the media. I hope that you'll do that. I mean, what we're trying to do this week is to talk about various issues with knowledgeable people like yourself on the around the issue of independence. Trinidad and Tobago is going to be 59 years old on August 31st. We're going to be 60 years old next year, same date. And we've had 59 years of experience as an independent country. And we want to do some reflection. We also want to take into account the future that is coming at us. We can't avoid it. It's coming at us. And we also want to take into account the current scenario here and what it implies for how we have gone forward from 1962 and what are the prospects for going forward further after 2021. So it is in that context that we want to talk about the media, and I will ask you a basic question, which is, how would you describe the state of the media in Trinidad and Tobago today after 59 years of independence? And what is important to note about it?
Well, I mean, I will have a particular perspective, I suppose, specific to my sector. and there is, I suppose, the society sort of more generally that media mirrors and media attempts to represent and to engage with in a variety of ways. 59 years on, it's difficult, I think, to have that conversation without fully apprehending the moment in which the globe is, which is this really radical and unusual pandemic moment. And I think that puts a different perspective on everything that we do and everything that we see. So there are some traditional ways in which we reflect upon national history and national aspirations around this time of the year. I feel this year, obviously, it is different because I think we have a slightly, not much, but a slightly clearer idea about the circumstances in which the globe finds itself, and Trinidad and Tobago as a small but important element, an aspect of that sort of global situation, or that the global crisis of this pandemic. So in looking at it, and Bhoe, if I may just interrupt shortly to say that my name is misspelled on the CG, so if that can be corrected, I would very much appreciate it. Yeah, these are just sort of, media hitches in live TV,
Could I ask you to take out the H from Sheila, please? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the ways in which to do that reflection about where is Trinidad and Tobago at 59 years on, approaching our 60th anniversary of independence, I think one way to do it, and perhaps in my view, the most useful way at the moment, is to look forward and to look back only in the context of how we can look forward and how does that drive us forward. So we are in a pandemic reality. We're in a moment where, I'm quoting someone, I don't remember the name, unfortunately, that described this pandemic moment in the world as a moment of irreducible uncertainty. And I think it's an analysis I agree with. We simply do not know. We do not know much about the virus. We do not know much about the vaccine. We do not know much about our future and what that future will look like beyond the pandemic. So I think traditional conversations, which is what I think I heard some of with your last guest, I was able to take in a bit of Dr. Cook Mego before me. I think anchoring discussions in the past and anchoring discussions in traditional ways, I would find that intellectually problematic. I would say, what kind of society do we want to be? And what is it possible to build in this time and this context? What we have not done up to this time, I think we have a very good understanding of what we have not done. If we look at the markers, important markers in your society, you look at the way in which information flows through your society, you look at the extent to which your population is informed, you look at the extent to which your population is living below lines of indigence, below lines of poverty, and you look at people's access and their perceptions and the reality of their sense of justice and equity. If we look at those sort of few key markers, I would say we haven't done particularly well. But I also understand that I will say that as someone of my generation, and that people who are of a previous generation, perhaps you, Bhoe, and perhaps others, and those older than you, who've been around and have that sort of long view, a longer view than we have, will understand that Trinidad and Tobago today is vastly different from colonial Trinidad and Tobago. I heard your last guest talk something about, raise this idea about whether we would have been better off as a colony. And I think anybody who lived in the 1940s, for example, and the 1950s, will tell you, and we do have some people alive with us still today, who can tell you about the degree of deprivation, the degree of discrimination and prejudice, the degree of squalor in which people live. So those may appear now to be fanciful ideas, but I don't think they're practical, I don't think they're real, and I don't think they're grounded in a serious reality. And that takes us to, I think, an important point, which is how well do we know this place? How well do we know this society? And when we talk about Trinidad and Tobago today, at approaching our 59th birthday, what Trinidad and Tobago are we speaking about? Do we share common understanding about this society? Do we even know this society anymore? And when we speak of it, what do we speak of? I think those are important questions that sort of to begin that conversation. And to say that, one, we have not done particularly well. I don't think we've done terribly. There's a long way to go. But in this pandemic moment, crafting those things, getting those parameters, putting those signposts towards a future, I think is terribly problematic.
All right. I like your perspective, which is working from a vision of the future backwards. And I want to state very clearly and categorically that I am happy that we are an independent country. I have no sense of nostalgia or interest in Trinidad and Tobago, considering at all whether it should have continued as a colonial dependency. We are an independent nation now, and we must find a way of forging and crafting and building independence and resilience. Whatever our failures, we must acknowledge, but we have to build the future. We have to build the country. So let us look a little bit at the future. Let us look at our current situation in the pandemic. What do you think the pandemic now requires of us that might not have been required before in looking at this future so ingrained in uncertainty and unpredictability?
I do not know that it is any different. What I would say is the level of intensity of purpose, the level of urgency, that is what has changed. So all of the issues that I think in all locations of the world, so there is a sort of a large picture that is emerging of inequity, of injustice, and those kinds of things that the pandemic it has at our noses.
It's making it clearer than it has ever been now.
It's making it clearer, right? It's making it terribly urgent.
Yes.
Because it is a moment in which we cannot not deal with it. That's just simply not an option. And I think it raises also another question about, have we left certain issues for too long? Can those things actually be remedied now in the circumstances in which the world finds itself and in which Trinidad and Tobago and all other countries find themselves? What I think we are seeing is that in particular cultural locations, Trinidad and Tobago being one, all across the globe, and individual countries in the globe being individual centers, cultural centers, where pandemic realities and pandemic consequences will manifest in particular ways. And I think what we have to look at in Trinidad and Tobago is how does it manifest here in our peculiar sort of cultural circumstance. And so there's a sort of a large global picture, and then inside of that, unraveling that to see what are the smaller sort of pictures that comprise this large thing. And you are seeing commonalities. You are seeing commonalities around issues of inequity. You're seeing commonalities around issues of injustice, economic imbalances. Edwidge Danticat, that Haitian-American, brilliant writer, said to me in an interview late last year on the pandemic that the cord is being pulled tight. Now we will see who is dying. And in a way, who have always been dying. And it forces us to see and to ask, why have they been dying? And I think that is an important sort of avenue and a lens through which to look at these pandemic realities and through which to understand them. Who are dying? Why are they dying? And in a sense, have they not always been dying? And I don't only mean people who are dying from the virus, because of course that is all purpose and the great level of everyone, but the consequences, and because this pandemic has been so consequential in so many ways. And the people who are being squeezed, and the people for whom that cord is being pulled especially tight, the people who are being strangled are those who have traditionally been strangled and are now being strangled further and in larger numbers.
Yeah. Can you point to anything in Trinidad and Tobago, given that broader perspective, that we need to pay extreme attention to now? I mean, there are 1 billion people in the world who live under the poverty line with extreme distress. This is 1 billion people in the world system. And it's not just the economic conditions, it's the conditions of living and the hardship of getting by each day, etc. It's very, very horrible. But when you look at Trinidad and Tobago, what are the sources of anxiety and distress and concern that we should be focused on here in Trinidad and Tobago, from your point of view, and taking a journalistic perspective too?
I would say two areas sort of emerge for me prominently. As of now, I guess more as we go, as we sort of see how this thing pans out. One would be our levels of poverty, and the difficulties there is that I don't think we are too clear on the extent of poverty. I don't think we are clear on where the poverty is, and I don't think we're clear on how that poverty looks. And the other area I would say is information. I think one of the markers of a progressively developing, independent nation and independent people is the way in which information flows through your society, and the extent to which those information flows are restrictive, and the extent to which they are open. In societies that are much more confident in themselves, societies that are more prosperous, that are further developed along the line, and not only developed economically, but developed in terms of your moral and your ethical compass, those societies tend to be very open information societies. Trinidad continues to be a restrictive information environment, much too restrictive, and in fact getting to be more restrictive, more choked, rather than more open. And that has consequences for the development and the future of a society. In this pandemic moment, it is particularly important that we look at those two areas of poverty and information, as I see it, because information access for people becomes that much more critical in this pandemic. And I mean, when I say information access, I think there's an assumption that once you are getting information about the number of people who die, the number of people who get the virus, the number of people who are vaccinated, the number of people who are, that you have a sense of this thing, and that is not the information, or the only information that you require. You need an environment in which there is diverse views, where you need an environment in which there is a lot of perspective, and where uncertainty is not responded to by false levels of certainty, that you will want to anchor ourselves so much in certainty that we then begin to engage in strategies related to information that may not ultimately, and I would venture, are not ultimately healthy for the society and for the future of the society. So I would say those two areas, in my view, of poverty and information flows in the society, I think those are two problematic areas, and those are two areas, in my view, that are critical to be looked at.
Well, I think you just made a very, very insightful and deep point, which is that you cannot deal with the reality of continuing and intensifying uncertainty by giving one a false sense of certainty. I think that is a very important and deep point. And the second thing, which is an implication of that, and we're talking now about Trinidad and Tobago society, is that you cannot have, for instance, a Minister of Finance giving you information about how much money the country earned and how much money the country spent and on what, and think that that is the information that is necessary for the population without scrutiny and interrogation. You cannot have a prime minister declaring positions and talking to the population and giving them information in a press conference without subjecting that to scrutiny and to challenge and to other opinions. You cannot have a leader of the opposition speaking to an audience from a platform or from the parliament and not subjecting herself to scrutiny and engagement. And indeed for them, I picked these out because these are important centers of authority and power in the society. But it goes for everybody else who has an obligation to the society. And it speaks to that issue of information that you are talking about, which is that is not just to give the information you think people need, is to create the conditions in which the flow of information can be free and contained. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, those sort of centers that you have described and those trends that you have described have been with us. I mean, these things, this has been the way our politics has sort of, managed itself, as it were. And those have been key flashpoints of governance throughout our post-independence history. And in that way, not particularly different from pre-independence times. The lack of accountability and what has emerged, in media work, vocabulary becomes very important, and language and how languaging sort of determines our perception of things. And there is a lot of talk about blame, and it's interesting to me that the issue of accountability has now been distorted and transformed into areas of blame. That once you get somebody to blame and you blame them, well, then everything is all right and we can move merrily along. But that question of blame is really a distortion of what a citizenry means when it talks about accountability, when it asks for accountability from a society. But when I was talking, Dr. Tiwari, about the ways in which we approach information, I think it is not only about information about your society, information about your economic markers, it's not only about that, it's also information about the pandemic, information about the virus, information about the vaccine, information about, and we've seen globally, and we're seeing here as well, vaccine advocacy, for example. This is one example, and perhaps a contentious example, but that needs to be discussed. What is the extent to which the international media is doing journalism? And what is the extent to which the international media, and by extension local media as well, is doing vaccine advocacy? I think these are important questions, and these are important questions for us to ask. And demands are being made of journalists to do advocacy instead of doing journalism. And many journalists themselves not really keen on or not really sort of too attentive to what is being asked of them, and therefore those two things become conflated, those two things, but journalists have to do journalism, and journalism means diverse information, and it means unrestricted flow of information, as opposed to restricting the flow of information so that you can support a particular point of view. And I find a lot of that is happening. The other thing that I'm noticing in terms of media and journalism and information, as I say, nothing here is original or specific or unique. It is a global context, and we are seeing sort of that represented locally in a variety of ways. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I may have lost my point there in my head, but which happens as you're getting a little bit older and a little bit grayer. But I'm sure it will come back and I'll return to it.
No,
But the whole conversation really that I want to have is about how information flows in the society and how information contends, that we cannot be afraid and so afraid of contrary information that what we want to do is put our boot to its neck and stamp it out and feel so lacking in confidence about the ability of sound information to inform people's views. And if I may just sort of extend that point a bit, I mean, I think already I feel at that point is sort of going a little bit all over the place because perhaps it's not as fully framed in my head yet. But one of the places I feel conversations also have to go is about how we all become complicit in restricting information flows and how we become complicit in that because in this pandemic moment, every single human being on the globe is experiencing a conflict of interest. And how do we navigate that individually and collectively when our parameters and our signposts up to this moment have been objectivity, have been fairness, have been those kinds of things, declaring your conflict of interest. We have a way of managing that among ourselves as a society, as people. But when we are all experiencing an individual conflict of interest, in the sense that we are all endangered by this virus, and we all are so seriously invested in how do we navigate our way beyond it, if there is a beyond it.
You have to explore that issue of personal conflict of interest a little more. You have to help me and viewers to understand that. How is it, how can you say that everyone in the world is now caught up in a conflict of interest individually? What do you mean by that? Explain that to me.
Well, something has happened that has endangered and had put us at a tremendous risk, it's a risk to life and personal well-being, physical and emotional and psychological well-being, economic well-being. And this thing that has happened is the fact of this pandemic, and that there is a virus outside there that is killing people, that is hurting people, that is ripping apart families, that is tearing apart communities, and that is tearing apart or threatening to potentially tear apart a civilization by virtue of asking of that civilization to do something that is unnatural to that civilization, which is stay apart. Human civilization, the momentum, the evolutionary momentum of life, of all living things, is to commune rather than to isolate and separate. So something has happened that's asking us to do something that is contrary to what we know and what is instinctual of all human beings and potentially all living things. And we are all individually, you, Bhoe, as well as me, Sheila, as well as Patsy down the road and John down the road, we are all invested because we are all at risk. And we are invested in how we navigate this time, whether we take a vaccine, don't take a vaccine, whether, basically all the ways, I guess the vaccine is the primary way, but all the ways in which we navigate this moment. So we are all invested in the problem, we are all invested in the solution. And we all have a vested interest, and that vested interest is our life, our well-being, our ability to be sane, our ability to continue as human beings, and our ability to sort of act in concert with other human beings as we sort of continue that large word that we call a civilization. So in that way, I would say we are all experiencing a conflict of interest.
Okay.
And that there is no view and there is no point of view anymore. And I think that is unique and radically unique in world development, that there is unlikely to be human beings on a planet who we can say quote unquote objective, quote unquote unbiased on this particular issue. And that is what I mean by all of us experiencing individual and collective conflict of interest in the pandemic. I don't know if that makes it any clearer.
Well, I think what I'm getting from you is that you say the pandemic has made self-interest extreme.
That's right.
And as a consequence, any other consideration is secondary. And it may very well be antithetical to our instinctive nature as human beings trying to create a community and a civilization, which is to commune and to engage and so on. And that self-interest can have deep-seated consequences. So, I mean, I take your point.
Yeah, and I mean, thank you very much for sort of putting it as clearly as you did. I guess, you know, somebody hearing it and speaking it is different. So I appreciate that. And it does, I think that does capture what I am trying to say. Yes.
You know, I read you loud and clear. I mean, I understand you, and I know that there are things swirling in your head. That is why you forget things, you know, because you have so many ideas in your head contending at once.
But in fact, and if I may, Bhoe, if I may just, I mean, I don't want to throw off your interview, but I do remember now, as you say, forgetting what I had forgotten before. One of the things that is happening is very contradictory. And we are all being asked in this moment to live a contradiction.
Yes.
When we say that we are living the new normal, when we talk about living with the virus, there are contradictions implied, there are deep contradictions that I do not know that we see and we explore. There is no such thing as a new normal. Let us begin there. There is no such thing as a new normal. If something is new, then it is not normal.
Yes.
And if it is normal, it is not new. So when we speak about globally about living a new normal, we are being asked and we are asking ourselves to live a contradiction. And how do human beings live that contradiction?
Yeah, well, I would urge you to maybe write a piece on that. I think you have a lot of deep ideas swirling in your head, and I think that writing, as you know, will help to clarify them, and it would be good to share some of those ideas with the public. Let me ask you something, though. You were talking about the free flow of information being important to democracy and having contending views, etc., and important to simply the engagement of conversation and the development of a civilization. But one of the problems that has emerged, for instance, with the new media, things like Facebook and Twitter and so on, is the extent to which calculated misinformation have really appropriated their own space. How do you configure that in what you are saying about the need for free information flow?
Well, calculated misinformation, there is absolutely nothing new about that. And new media did not invent that. That is not an invention of this generation. It's not an invention of the technology. Propagandist impulses have been with us, as you would know, forever and ever. It has been, I mean, the only thing different now, in my view, is that we have moved, the technology has moved us past the days where a light aircraft would pass over a country or a city and drop flyers.
Yes.
What has changed is that there are platforms now that enable that and expand the reach of it and expand the number of people who can, and expand the opportunities, and therefore expand the amount of damage that can be done by this thing. But the mere idea, I think sometimes we conflate the technology. I'm sorry, were you about to say something?
No, I was just going to say that it's really the existence of the new technology and the ubiquity that it offers. And
That's
with
right.
that, of course, the range of audiences that you can
Yeah, that is the only thing in my view that is different.
Yeah.
The reach, and that you have, it is a tool, and it is such a radically, a radically different tool, and a tool with so much reach across the globe, that it appears to us as if it is doing something new, but it's actually not doing anything new. So when we address that, I think sometimes I feel we address misinformation with disinformation. When we have a lot of misinformation, and just to clarify what I mean, and I'm sure what you also mean by it, is that you have poison being inserted deliberately into an information stream to pollute that information stream. The information is known to be false, it is invented, and it is deliberately inserted into an information stream and made to circulate deliberately to achieve a particular purpose. That would be very different from people making an error, from journalists having an inaccuracy in a story, etc. And I think all those things become conflated. But it seems to me that to address that problem, misinformation, these pollutants that are these deliberate falsehoods that are inserted into information streams, has been to fight misinformation with disinformation. In other words, if I say that the leaf is green, and that is a fact, and the leaf is green, is going to assist in some way a view that is being circulated by, say, bad actors on social media platforms and on digital platforms, then I will just not say the fact that the leaf is green. So you fight the potential for misinformation and actual misinformation with disinformation. You withhold particular bits of information. You withhold it because it can be potentially manipulated for misinformation purposes. Right. So you understand? And I think that is problematic. I do not feel that we should be fighting misinformation with disinformation. The environment has to be much more open and much more diverse so that information's contend.
All right. I'll ask you one final question. I have to be short. We go into the news. And that final question is journalism and media in danger? And if so, how? I would say not at the moment, and I would say that against the grain of everything else that may indicate to me and to other people that it is in danger. And I say it is not in danger because whatever world is being created in this pandemic moment, and if we do emerge out of this, whatever world we emerge into, has to be a world where information is shared among people, and there is a free flow of information. I don't think that is something that individual people and collectively we will decide is not essential. And as long as that remains essential, journalism will remain essential. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sheila Rampersad, for engaging me this morning and for sharing so many, I think, good and deep insights on this subject with all listeners and our viewers. And I hope on another occasion we can have another conversation. You may not be president of MAT then, but that doesn't make you any less of an intellect or force, and we will engage. And I hope you will write that article that I'm suggesting. Okay? So, thank you very much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, brothers and sisters, for being with us on U97.5 FM Hot Like Pepper Radio and MCTV, Multicultural TV. This has been Brighter Morning with Bhoe, and I am Bhoe Tiwari. Tomorrow we have Dr. Winford James. We will talk with him, and we have Mr. David Rudder. We will also talk to him. So we look forward to seeing